When deciding to play retro video games, one of the first decisions to be made is what to play them on. And when it comes to what you should play them on, what could be a more obvious suggestion than the original hardware itself? Well, with a myriad of other options these days, I'm here to help answer if playing on original hardware is the choice for you, and more importantly, what happens to people who don't. Naturally, as with anything that has multiple ways of doing it, people will declare one way of doing it the best, and all but imply that they are more legitimate for doing so, if not just better people overall. That being said, plenty of people play on original hardware without being a barnhole about it, and it's a great option to consider. In my usual fashion, I'm going to go over some of the pros and cons of playing on original hardware, which should help you decide whether or not it's for you based on which points you identify with the most. The first thing that people like to bring up when it comes to original hardware is price. Are you the type of person who has lots of money but doesn't like continuing to have it? Well, then sign up right here, my friend. If you want to have a physical collection of consoles and games, it can be expensive, and depending which games you're after and how much self-control you have, extremely expensive. As a result, collecting this stuff can be a hard sell for newcomers, as most of the people who are into it have already been doing it for a long time and have therefore accumulated a decent amount of stuff. If you're just getting into it, then you'll likely need to be comfortable with not having a ton of games and consoles starting off, which is fine. Most collectors have way more stuff than they could ever play anyways, so there's nothing wrong with having just a few things to focus on. Plus, just because some consoles are expensive to collect for doesn't mean every single video game will cost you a fortune. Some games are cheaper than others, and there's a ton of different consoles and games to choose from. Plus, you could always just stick to a single console to keep things relatively cheaper and simpler. Who am I kidding? One console always leads to 10 more. When collecting original hardware, there's no rule that says when to stop, and most gamers take full advantage of that, so be wary. Alright, the next big check mark that can be placed in the positive column for original hardware would be the accuracy of the gameplay. After all, what could be more accurate to the original format of a game than playing it in its original format? Alternatives are known for their issues: colors not being quite the right shade, difference in sound emulation, performance differences, graphical glitches. If there's a difference, no matter how big or small, somebody hardcore enough will find it. But you may be thinking, well, I'm not that hardcore. Are these differences that would actually negatively impact the experience, or is it just something that elitists say to wet their whistles? Well, that's a good question to ask. While these differences may not bother a lot of people, I do think there's merit to games being exactly as they were originally designed. For example, if something's a bit off, then without playing the original, you may never know, and then you would go on to believe that's just how it was. Like, say you're playing Sonic and you think to yourself, wait a second, was Sonic always blue? I gotta plug in a copy on an original Genesis to check and make sure. But what if it's not quite the exact same shade of blue? That's where it can get iffy. The point is, when you're playing on original hardware, it takes out the guesswork and you know what you have in front of you. The game's exactly as the designers released them to the public originally, with their beauty and flaws all intact. I guess it just comes down to how important authenticity is to you. But then, of course, if we are going to go down the old authenticity road, we gotta talk about displays. After all, displays are hardware and a huge part of the authentic experience in the eyes of many. If you've been following the retro gaming community for any amount of time, then you're probably well aware that plugging an original retro console directly into an HD TV will get you a one-way ticket to you-know-where, and we're talking lock the door and throw away the key in most cases. Now, while the merits of using an older tube TV for retro games requires an entire video to explain, I've already made some of those myself, for the sake of this video, you just need to know that lots of retro gamers feel they are the intended fit. Heck, on this channel, I know I can always get a praise be the CRT from my viewers. Point being, if you're truly interested in the accuracy of your retro games, it's not enough to play them on the original hardware. You need to play them on either an older TV or with the right equipment on a more modern TV. That's extra work required for setup and extra work that some people may not be interested in. As a result, a common knock against playing on original hardware is that it's just not a simple plug and play setup, since you gotta deal with extra steps, or as they like to call it, extra bull hockey. But to that I say, hold on a second. Once I got my CRT, I hooked up my NES with a basic composite video cable straight into the TV. That sounds like plug and play to me, and just look at the fun I'm having. Look at it. You can't argue with that kind of fun. Sure, playing on CRTs can eventually lead to looking into higher quality connections like S-Video and RGB, but those are optional upgrades that you don't have to do. Plus, you'll always have fans of dithering tell you it's something you shouldn't do anyway. I will say though that if you want to have original hardware and you're going to have multiple consoles, which let's be honest, most people will, you're going to need to be comfortable with something that some people may find disturbing: cords. Yeah, just one on its own isn't so bad, but get a load of this, and that, and this. And trust me, that's all child's play compared to some of the other cable nightmares I've seen. Cable management is essential when it comes to this stuff. If you don't keep all your cables organized, it can turn into a problem real fast. In fact, there's even some old wives' tales you hear from time to time about retro gamers who got lost in their cords and were never seen again. Of course, cords can be a problem for devices that aren't the original hardware as well. The point is, people will sometimes intentionally look for options outside of the original hardware so that they can have multiple consoles they're able to play on one device for the sake of simplicity and, you guessed it, less cords. For example, something like a RetroPie. You put tons of games on it for a bunch of different consoles and you're all set to go. But next we gotta talk about something else that's really important, being the controller that you use. A lot of retro gamers will argue this is the most important part of the experience. After all, it is what you, the game player, are in the most direct and constant contact with. Luckily, this is something that can be easily hooked up to other setups outside of original hardware, creating scenarios where you're half using original hardware and half not. In fact, this would probably be a good time to bring up the fact that even people who mostly use original hardware will still use non-original hardware mixed in or on the side. For example, I mostly use original hardware, but I do use many consoles on the side when I find them to be convenient. Okay, but let's get to some of the more intangible reasons people play on original hardware. That's right, we're getting into the more nostalgic, sentimental territory, and for almost anybody who plays on original hardware, this is a factor. It sure is for me. There's just something about using what you used as a kid that makes your brain say, yeah, this is good, and brings you back to that time when you were younger, allowing you to conjure up and enjoy some of those same happy feelings you had as a kid. Plus, even if it's not a console you owned as a kid, there's still something novel about having something so old that still works and can be used to play awesome video games. Heck, just the act of plugging and unplugging cartridges does it for me. Again, it comes down to how much this sort of stuff feels authentic to you and how much that matters. Also, if you're interested in the whole collecting aspect, which heck is half the joy for some people, this is the way to do it. I mean, I suppose you could collect them without ever playing them, but unlike most things people collect that only ever end up serving the purpose of being stared at, video games offer the unique benefit of being something that you can actually use in addition to staring at. Plus, compared to other forms of media, video games get more credit for being commercially available in a format that people would label as original. For example, you don't see many people waving around their VHS copy of The Mask and using words like authentic and original to describe it. So video games are just a little more special in that kind of way. And that about does it for my thoughts. If you're thinking, hey, you didn't give a yes or no answer to whether or not I should play on original hardware, well, that's because for every person who watches this video, I respect your individuality too much to try to tell you what to do. Rather, I can go over the various factors and let you decide for yourself. Really, so long as you enjoy playing retro video games or even just hearing about them, then you get a metaphorical high five from me. If you play on original hardware, then great, and if not, that's great too. Plus, you can always give original hardware a try if at any point you do get curious. But don't just do it because you think it's the only legitimate way of playing. Anyways, this topic is a great opportunity for all of you watching to give your personal reasons for why you either do or don't use original hardware. And of course, what combination of the two you may utilize. So with that, be sure to leave your comments down below, and I will see ya in the next video.
He's the retro bird, yeah, and he's talking about video games. He's